on the road, on a road trip in India through Kerala, Karnataka and Goa, and we are taking our Ayurvedic lifestyle on the road. I hope you'll follow us and get some interesting information from our vlog. See you soon! Seekers, welcome to our Sriseeker vlog on Ayurveda on the road. So this time we're coming to you live via a very nice motorcycle road trip through South India, mainly Kerala, Karnataka and Goa, and then we're going to make our way back to Kerala. So it's been some time that we've been planning this trip, and we're very excited that we finally could do it. And at the same time, we're not forgetting the main principles of our lifestyle, and we're trying to follow them on the road, although of course that presents its challenges, and that's exactly what I wanted to talk about regarding taking the Ayurvedic lifestyle on the road and what that means.
There's foot over there.
So just to begin with, I want to give a small brief introduction about the ideas that I would like to explore during this vlog, and I'm not exactly sure how many episodes I'm going to make, but hopefully about 10 or so, because the road certainly presents its challenges and throws unexpected things into the mix. So that means that we have to adapt, adjust, and remain flexible, just as Ayurveda would have us do. So regarding our first episode, what I wanted to focus on are the primary elements. And as of late, I have been uniting the ideas that have been shared in the Buddhist suttas as well as the primary texts on Ayurveda regarding the basic principles of Ayurveda, which I believe can be helpful to just about anyone and everyone in their life. Now, when we take that on the road, of course, that throws us into a situation that is different from our day-to-day, more or less routine lifestyle. And it begs us to pay closer attention and to become more aware about how we manage ourselves as well as how we treat situations that we face in the moment. So as far as the primary elements, just to give a slight theoretic background on that before going into the practical application, we know that Ayurveda speaks about 5 primary elements, and those are, and most of us know about it, space, air, or otherwise sometimes also spoken of as wind energy, and then we have fire energy, and then we have the element of water and the element of soil or earth. Now, when we speak about these 5 basic principles which relate to Ayurveda, but are also spoken of in the Buddhist scriptures, except that in the Buddhist scriptures, we primarily find reference to the 4 primary elements, and those are earth, water, fire, and air. The space element, or the Akash element, that is easily observable in the Ayurvedic scriptures is not as easily discernible in the Buddhist scriptures. And There are reasons for that, primarily because the Akash, or the space element of Ayurveda, in many ways relates to the consciousness or the chitta aspect that is spoken in Buddhist texts. So in a way, it is somewhat interchangeable, but it's not exactly the same because it is not spoken of in physical terms. So probably that's really the distinction, the main distinction, in that the four elements that are given in the Buddhist Ayurveda, which are identical to those in Ayurvedic treatments, those relate more or less primarily to the physical manifestation of the primary elements. When it comes to space, we cannot really manifest that as a physical reality. In a sense, space contains a possibility for things to manifest, but in itself, the philosophy said space is the unmanifest. So in that sense, it relates more to the consciousness or the non-material, non-physical aspects that are spoken extensively in Buddhism in relation to the mind and consciousness. So we can more or less say that basically all the elements are present in both philosophies, but there is a distinction between the material, which are the water, the earth, the fire, and the wind or air element, and then the non-material, which is the space, or otherwise known as Akash in Ayurvedic scriptures. So, well, you know, what difference does that make to us? Now we'll speak a little bit about the practical applicability, and I don't want to go too extensively into each element in this video because I'd like to make separate episodes specifically on each element, because each element has a tremendous capacity to influence our lives. But today, as an introduction, I just want to speak more broadly and really just to help us observe the presence of these elements all around us and all throughout our reality, whether it be our inner reality as well as our outer physical reality. So what do we mean by the observance of these elements, the observation of them in our physical reality? Well, if we talk about obviously such basic elements as water, earth, wind, fire, these are things that we can easily observe in our surroundings, right? And these are elements that we are very familiar with in their exact manifestation, let's say, or their primary manifestation. But these elements are actually present just about in every form that manifests itself in a physical reality. What does that mean? Well, it means that our bodies, the bodies of other beings, be it animals or plants, and even rocks, will have these primary elements present and functioning not only as a unit of sorts, but more so as a type of energy. So we would say that there is an energy behind the element that manifests itself in the form of an element. And so when we think about it, when we talk about water, when we see water as a regular expression of itself, let's say in the form of a river or in the form of the water coming out of our tap, in the kitchen, right? So as simple as that, we tend to observe a liquid. Well, liquids exist in many different forms. They are not only water. There are liquids that are not water per se. So in that sense, can we say that the element of water exists in every liquid? Yes. It is not water, but it is the element, right? The energy of a liquid that manifests itself. Of course, when we talk about it theoretically, we have united it under one easily understandable term as water, but we are not speaking about H2O strictly, right? We are speaking about liquid forms. And so, for example, when we think about the gastric acid, which is a liquid, right? So is that a water element or is that a different element? Well, actually, when it comes to digestion and anything that is hyperacidic, we actually classify that more so under the fire element, just like we would classify liquid gas under the fire element, because it is combustible and therefore it can be turned into a flame. So a liquid that can be turned into a flame would be considered a fire element because it is combustible, and yet it comes initially in the form of a liquid. So what does that mean? How can we rationalize that? Well, actually what it means is that there is some quantity of the element of water, but really liquid, that is manifesting itself in a liquid form of a combustible element of fire. In that case, we would not speak of, let's say, the gastric acid as purely being of fire energy or Agni, which is what we call it in Sanskrit. It would be a combination of both. There is a ratio. I would not be able to give you the exact ratio, but I would say that it is majority fire element, and it is in a small amount a liquid element. So we do see also combinations of elements. Just like, for example, if we observe the mud, we can see that the mud is a kind of solid, but yet to some extent with liquid forms present in it, right? It's a mixture of earth and water, and we know that from nature. That's pretty easy to observe. And so anytime that we combine water with earth, we will get a muddy type structure. And in that case, again, we would have both elements present in those two. Now, would it be that only those two are present? Actually, it is very likely that more than two are present, but those will be the dominant ones and the ones that we will be able to easily observe. And in that case also, if they are the dominant ones, they are the ones that are going to have the greater influence on other forms with their liquidity and, let's say, with their solidness, right? So now when we are speaking about these primary elements, we are truly speaking about their quality, not so much their chemical composition, because the chemical composition changes from body to body or being to being, structure to structure. However, the primary nature of the element actually resides in its quality. So the quality of water is being a liquid, or let's say we can also speak about humidity as far as water is concerned. When we speak about the earth element, we are actually really referring to solidity of any structure. So if we speak about a rock, which is a hard structure and is a rather dry structure, it does not contain much water in it, but it is a solid structure. We would not refer to it as earth, although of course we are speaking about minerals and a very solidified form of those minerals. So we wouldn't normally refer to that as earth, right? We would refer to it as a rock. But however, when we speak about the primary aspect of its energetic force, we would be speaking about the solidity of the rock, and that's where we would find the presence of the earth element. And we would also find other elements in smaller, much smaller, less observable quantity, and they would not have as much influence, but yet for functionality, we would be able to also locate other elements in their primary form. Now let's talk a little bit about the wind energy, and this is where I'd like to tie it in with our trip and speak about wind as one of the greater forces that has been present with us throughout our trip so far. So of course, as we are taking a motorcycle trip, and I'm trying to share a little bit of the traveling videos and some images just to kind of share the scenery, but also some part of the experience of what we are going through. Wind is certainly one of the major forces that's present with us as we're moving along. So since we are quite exposed on a motorcycle to the nature elements, wind is certainly one that has been manifesting its presence in its most obvious and forceful way. So now, of course, it becomes important that we remain very mindful of the excess of the wind energy that we are experiencing. And let me just kind of give a little bit of the positives and then speak about, let's say, the negatives, but it's not really that black and white. The positives of wind are actually creativity, imagination, so the energy of movement. Now we are speaking about the quality of this primary element. It is not so much about the wind blowing or, let's say, a storm in itself, but it is really the movement, which is the quality that is its primary quality of the energy of wind or air. Really, we can talk about air, but in our case, air is manifesting itself as strong winds as we go along on the motorcycle. So in that case, when we speak about the positives, the creativity, the movement, and the imagination, whenever we travel, and it really doesn't have to be on a motorcycle, right? It can be by train, it can be by car, it can be by airplane. The movement aspect in itself is what brings creativity and imagination into play. It activates it, right? It starts to dominate our being at the time of the event, which is a positive thing. All of us can use some creativity and some imagination to make our lives more interesting and more diverse. And so that's a very positive aspect, but of course it has to also be maintained in a rightful measure, because when in too much excess, wind can create the type of delusional negative aspects. So, imagination can become an infatuation or a kind of obsession, even if we allow the imagination to run too wild, right? So in that way, we also try to work on staying alert and aware about not letting the wind element get too much out of hand and have too much of an energy. Now, what would we do about that, since traveling on a motorcycle really presents its specifics and there's nothing we can do to avoid experiencing these extreme levels of air and wind energy affecting us? Well, we have to basically balance it out by bringing in elements of solidity and elements of cooling water, calming effects of the water, which is what we try to do with every stop. For example, of course, the first thing that you would want to do is take a shower and definitely wash your head to just kind of have the liquid energy come over the head and cool down the, let's say, the extreme levels of the movement. While we are traveling, there's also things that we can do to protect ourselves by, wearing the proper helmets and by closing ourselves, a certain area so that we are not exposed to the wind, for example, in the throat area or in the ears, anywhere where we have a lot of openings, or especially the nose, of course. So these are pretty basic things, and people don't really think about it in terms of Ayurveda, right? When we are just going on a motorcycle, we're not thinking, okay, let me remember what is it that I learned from Ayurveda about how should I ride a motorcycle. But actually all of these things are present, and they are functioning according to the way that their qualities will manifest. So if we are aware about those things, then we're able to make the necessary adjustments and basically prevent, which is really the number one task of Ayurveda, is to help us, to educate us in the understanding of how nature, and therefore our nature within, functions. And so we can make those adjustments so that we are not moved too far out of balance, right? So that one element does not overtake the other elements. So it's really just about helping us maintain balance through awareness about some of the basic primary aspects of how nature functions. So just to conclude, I would say that when we do expose ourselves to the elements in a more extreme way, and a motorcycle trip doesn't present itself only in this extreme exposure to wind, although that's the number one exposure. We are also exposed to the sun, which would be the fire energy. We are also exposed to the rain whenever the rain comes, and it has been somewhat rainy at times. We are traveling in a kind of in-between season where it is actually the summer season currently in India. So April, the month of April, is actually the height of summer in South India, and it does change according to where you are in India, whether you are in the south or you are high up in the north, in the mountains, in the Himalayas. The seasons do change, and the monsoon season does change. But for us currently, through the areas that we are passing, it is actually the height of the summer. And the height of the summer here means very high temperatures as well as very high humidity. So we are dealing with a lot of fire energy as well as some increased levels of water energy through the humidity. And we are expecting to see more rains as we go along, and as we enter the month of May, we are going to begin to enter the monsoon seasons. Those are the typical timelines, but things have not been working according to typical timelines in the world as of late, and I think everyone has been able to observe that. especially in the behavior of the climate and nature. So we are actually getting some earlier rains this time around, and it seems that the monsoon is coming a little bit early, almost 1 month early. So we have been exposed to some higher levels of rainfall, but we have been able to somewhat avoid being too exposed. And of course we have our protective gear, which is again part of staying aware about exposure to the elements. And we have prepared ourselves for this trip to make sure that whether we are exposed to the sun, we have the proper protection, and we will normally wear something fairly light, but something that will cover pretty much, you know, our arms, and will not expose them all the way to the bottom of our legs. So we are not exposing our skin to the sun directly. And at the same time, if it rains, we have our raincoats, and we make sure that the water does not overwhelm us as well. So there you go. We are now speaking about 3 primary elements as far as the water is concerned and the rain exposure. And then when we speak about the sun, and of course riding, sometimes in some areas where we are really exposed to the sun, we are also staying very alert about that. And then of course the wind that we've already spoke about extensively. Now, what about the earth? Well, the earth element is also fairly present in that, you know, riding on the motorcycle, we are very much aware about the ground that we are going on, because, you know, as you know, motorcycles are a bit of a rougher ride in general than a car would be. So we are also very much aware through the bumps and the rocks sometimes. You know, for the most part, the roads have been very good, very smooth. So if anyone is considering a trip through Kerala or Karnataka, you know, we are definitely recommending an adventure like this. And the conditions have actually been better than we expected. So it's always good to lower your expectations when it comes to these kind of trips, and be surprised, right? And have the reality exceed your expectations. So the lower the expectations, the greater the chances that your expectations will be exceeded. So that's another part of the Ayurvedic type approach in philosophy, as well as a very Buddhist approach. This trip is definitely a great exercise in the essentials, right? On a motorcycle, we had to really pare our things down to the bare minimum. We only have a handful of clothing articles with us on the road. We have just 2 pairs of shoes, and those are basically, one pair is the riding shoes, the other pair is just the flip-flops that we will put on once we are off the bike and we're exploring an area. We let our feet rest and relax, and that doesn't take too much space, because as we ride, our larger shoes are with us on our feet as we ride. And once we are in the hotel room, then we're able to just you know, take out our slim flip-flops that don't take up too much space in our luggages. So that's another philosophical approach to taking this kind of travel on the road, in that it really forces you to examine what is really the bare minimum that is sufficient to spend 1.5 months on the road, continuously changing locations, being in this perpetual movement, and at the same time just providing yourself with those necessities that keep you stable and well adjusted and well balanced on the road. Another big aspect that I do want to mention, and that has to do with our cosmetics. So when it comes to Ayurveda, as you know, there are many practices, and Ayurveda pays great attention to herbal remedies and all types of powders, you know, and natural nature pharmacology, right? So this is something that we also are, you know, was one of our priorities, was to get the proper cosmetics with us on the road. And since, especially as we are riding, our faces are actually the parts that are the most exposed to the wind, to the dust, to the sun, because that's the part that we are using to be able to see and navigate what's around us. And you know, the bodies are covered and not as exposed to the elements, but the face is really the one that's kind of bearing the brunt of all the dust flying into our face, as well as all the other aspects of whatever comes with that air. So we made sure that we actually packed a good supply of natural remedies. We do have some clays, we have some nice moisturizers, as well as very natural toners with essential oils, and good scrubs and cleansers that are helping us maintain a clean complexion. And as soon as we get into the hotel, that's usually kind of the first thing that comes out of the bag, and it's packed very close to the surface so that we can have quick and easy access to making sure that we don't let all of that dust settle too deeply into our pores. Now, it's important because of course, if we don't do that, then we're going to run into issues of breakouts and, you know, just having issues with our skin, which is not pleasant. And it's not even about the aesthetic or the look. It's really just about maintaining our health, and also just knowing that while you're on the road, you're exposing yourself to this harmful elements to your skin. So you need to just be well prepared and make sure that those parts are taken care of as well. So I hope that this initial introduction and just a kind of opening conversation on the topics, and just a very broad look into the primary nature of the basic elements that are present in our outside as well as our inner reality, are going to then take a more detailed approach in talking about each element separately, so that we can really understand how we can observe this element in its manifestation and in its presence, both within and without our reality, so that we can also understand something more about ourselves, as well as so that we can have better tools that can empower us to manage our outside reality. I hope that you've enjoyed this first introduction, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. Please enjoy these videos as much as you can, although they're going to be pretty simple. It's a kind of makeshift studio setting. I am currently just on the balcony of our hotel where we are staying in Wayanad, which is a Western Ghat mountain region in Kerala. Very, very high mountain region. Some of the peaks reach up to 2,000 meters. So it is said to be among some of the top mountains compared to the Himalayas. So this is also a very special place, and it's very nice to join you from here. And I hope that the next time we see each other, we'll be in a setting just as nice as this. Thank you for spending the time, and I hope that you'll enjoy learning more about yourself and about Ayurveda. Ayurveda.